Hello everyone. So today what we're going to do is I'm going to show you an actual tattoo on a human being from start to finish. I'm going to show you some line work secrets and some shading secrets that helped me out along the way, and I'm going to break down and explain everything I'm doing during this tattoo. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos like this, so if you like this kind of content or anything with tattooing, like and subscribe below to see more.
Okay, so before we get into the tattoo, I'm going to explain everything I'm using. So I'm going to be using my Cheyenne Soul Unlimited right here, which is a 4-stroke, which is great for what I'm using it for with this traditional design. I'm using an 11 round liner, a 15 curve mag. I have what I use, you could use Vaseline. So the inks that I'm using is my straight black. I always start that one on the right, just so I know anytime I set up, my black's always going to be to the right. And then I have 6 drops black, 3 drops black. And I got my gloves, paper towels, and my soap, which I don't use green soap, I use dial soap, and everything is wrapped up. Another thing to think about, make sure your armrest is wrapped up, and I put a paper towel on mine just to catch some of the ink and plasma that drops so it doesn't drop onto the floor, which is super gross. All right, so before we get started, we're gonna make sure that our needle is set correctly. I like to hang my needle out a little bit so I run on the tip of the needle. So when that's set up, you always want to start from the bottom. That way you're not rubbing your stencil off the whole way through your tattoo. So we'll start down here. When you get to the end of the line, what I'm doing in this leaf right here, I get to the end and I kind of whip it out so it's not just a solid stopping point. Right like this. Things you want to think about when you are tattooing is you want to make sure that you are going the same depth the whole time. You don't want to go too deep in some areas or too light in some areas because it won't make crisp lines. So just getting used to going the same depth the whole way through your tattoo will help you get clean lines. And another thing would be how fast your hand's running. So if I was to move quicker on this line, the line wouldn't be as crisp as it would be keeping the same consistent hand speed the whole way through the tattoo. Anytime I'm pulling a line, I'm making sure that I have 3 points of contact the whole time, which means, I'm stretching and I have stability on my right hand that I'm tattooing with as well. The other thing to think about whenever I first started tattooing that I forgot about was anytime I pick up the needle, I'm making sure I dip it in the ink. That way I have enough ink in the tube at all times to be able to pull a line. Another thing would be if you're pulling a line and you start to feel uncomfortable, one way to fix that, instead of trying to push through and do the whole line,
So if you start on a line and kind of whip out at the end of your line, and then when you go back in, you start back a little bit to finish that, that'll help out make a consistent line without you having to try to overstress yourself and, you know, cause problems with shaking and everything. So like I did right there. All right, I'm going to speed up and go through this rose, and I'll slow it back down whenever I start on the skeleton. Alright, so now we're at the skeleton. There's a lot of small lines that you really have to pay attention where they are and kind of focus on where your hands are, because it's really easy to wipe away the stencil. So you want to make sure that you're not rubbing. And anytime I do a line, instead of wiping away, what I'll do is just dab it. So just like that, instead of wiping it. Helps as well on designs that are really intricate. Anytime before I do a line, I'm making sure I put Vaseline down. That just makes it a whole lot easier to get the ink off the skin. Instead of it just smearing everywhere, it'll actually pull off the skin very easily. Now make sure anytime I'm using the Vaseline, if you watch what I'm doing, I'm just using my pinky. That way it doesn't get all over my fingers and affect the way I can hold my machine. Because if it gets on your grip, it's going to be a mess trying to hang onto your machine and not have it slip out. So that's why anytime I do it, I just use my pinky right here. That way it doesn't affect anything I do. if you can tell, I'm doing everything on the right side first because I am right-handed. So if I try to do it on this side, I'm going to be wiping my stencil away. So it's one thing you always want to kind of be aware of when you are tattooing, is because your stencil is pretty much your guidelines on how to tattoo. Without that, you're going to be in trouble, especially if you are first starting out. The most important thing to line work is just, like I said earlier, keeping a steady pace, just following your stencil. So anytime I make a stencil, I make sure it's absolutely perfect. So all I have to do is follow the lines. It's also why I take really good care of the stencil as I'm doing it, because, you know, with a stencil, it makes it a lot easier. You know exactly where to go, where all your lines should be, and you don't have to worry about anything. Alright, we're going to speed up through this part until we get to the end of the skeleton. Alright, so there we have the line work done. We're going to take a little break and then we'll get back and start on the shading. What I do for traditional stuff, I always start out with my black. Most of the tattoos that I do, when I start out shading, I'm always starting out with black. So what we're going to do is work on the pepper shading technique. So what you do, you just go into the skin, and then you work your way out, and then you just flick out at the end, kind of like we did with the lines and the leaves. So I'll show you how to do that now. It's also called the whip technique. And I'm going to be making more videos going in detail about these things. This is just a video showing you how to, from start to finish, complete a tattoo. So the next couple of videos I'm going to come out with, I'm going to go into detail about all the lining techniques and all the things you can do, and also the different shading techniques you use along with what machine to use with them as well. Yeah, so just getting used to that motion right there. It's where you're just kind of flicking it out at the end. That way you have all that transitions that you need, and you're only really using black. And after that, we could go back with some gray, just kind of feather it out a little bit. But I'm going to speed up this video a little bit so we could get through, and then I'll slow it down as soon as we get to the skeleton. Okay, so now we're up top. We're kind of going to use a different technique for it in here. So we're going to use the packing technique, which what you're going to do is just do little circles. That way it's completely saturated in these super dark areas. Another way to do this would be the cross hatch technique. So you go one way and then go another way. That's one way to do it. But for this tattoo, I prefer doing little circles, which will saturate really well. there we have the completed tattoo. Awesome. So if you'd like to see more stuff like this and anything about tattooing, all you got to do is like down below and subscribe for more content. Have a good one.